The training is short today, it's only 1 hour, so I've had to limit and focus today's session on responding essentially to disclosures people make about family violence rather than looking at the common myths and causes and things like that. We just don't have time today. We'll also look at how to do safety planning and about referrals and secondary consultation. So basically, in terms of prevalence and why it's important for us to start asking these questions about family violence is that it is, whilst underreported, there are high rates of reports made to Vic Police, and there's also amongst those reports, more reports on top of that that are made directly to services, including GPs, health professionals, social workers and other areas that go above and beyond the 60,000 from 2012 to 13. Intimate partner violence is the top risk factor for death, disability and illness in Victorian women aged 15 to 44. I know that that stat has been told over and over again, but it's pretty astounding that intimate partner violence is, one of the leading causes of death, disability and illness, more so than other risk factors such as high blood pressure and obesity and smoking. And interestingly, this survey that was done in Brisbane around women attending randomly chosen GP practices showed 1 in 3 women in current relationships had experienced partner abuse in their lifetime, and they're seeing up to 5 women per week who have experienced some form of intimate partner violence in the previous 12 months. And that's from 2008, when we weren't reporting anywhere near as much as we are now. So what is family violence? Under the Protection Act that was made in 2008, there are variations, but this is the definition that we use when we're thinking about intervention orders and when we're describing what is legal and illegal behaviours. The Protection Act says that family violence is behaviour by a person towards a family member, and a family member could be partner. It does, I think, include children. It also includes parents, siblings and same-sex relationships, carer, like for people with disabilities. So it's quite broad so that people who are in diverse groups don't miss out as well on, being able to get protection under our laws around family violence and safety. So it's around physical and sexual abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, economic abuse, threatening behaviour, behaviour that's coercive or in any other way controls or dominates a family member and causes them to feel fear. It's also behaviour that causes a child to hear, witness or otherwise be exposed to family violence. All of the behaviours that were listed above. So whilst that's the definition that we use in legal terms, when we're talking about family violence, domestic violence, we are looking at it and conceptualising it as, a experience of power and control. It's about patterns of behaviour. It's not like, once off one person has an argument, that's, we have arguments in relationships. It's not about that. It's about that ongoing pattern of behaviours that make us feel fear, make people continuously vulnerable or, exposed to unsafe, abusive kind of interactions. So when we talk to victims, and largely it is women, it is a gendered experience, this wheel is something that we do use to talk to people about what power and control might look like, what domestic violence might look like, and it has been developed by the Duluth, which is the domestic abuse project in the US. So it talks about all the different ways and kind of highlights all the different ways that someone might be experiencing behaviours that don't necessarily come as one-offs. So whilst there might be physical abuse, there might not be physical abuse, but there might be threats, there might be economic abuse, there might be emotional abuse, and there's a whole bunch of examples on there about what they might look like. So the emotional stuff tends to look like name calling, putting somebody down. It kind of comes hand in hand with intimidation sometimes. So it might be standing over sort of behaviours, making you feel like you're going crazy. So saying one thing and then saying something else and then backtracking on that thing. So you think, did I really do that? Did I experience that? And so just say, for example, women say things to me like, there was an incident and I was physically harmed in that incident, and then he turned around to me the next day and goes, that never happened, like you're making like that totally never happened, this is exactly what I said, and I know that you were really upset at the time, maybe you're making it up. And so you start to think that you're making it up. It's that sort of experience. So we'll move quickly straight into what we need to kind of do around recognising and responding. And if there are any gaps that you feel like are being brushed over, please stop me. When we talk about responding to family violence and responding to disclosures, sometimes we kind of get the sense just generally that people don't want to talk about it, and it might be something that's not helpful, or if I do and I don't know how to contain it, what next? And maybe I'm just opening a can of worms. The issue is that it would be good for us to all know about how we can respond to someone, because the majority of victims, and it's largely women, will tell someone and do approach someone for assistance at some point in time. It is usually at a point of crisis, and it is usually going to be to friends, to family members and other general helping professions, rather than coming directly to a family violence service. And that we often see is through GPs, maternal child health nurses and general family support staff at the time of, say, new births, pregnancies and things like that. And with, I guess, more and more awareness about things like elder abuse, it does come out through health professionals in that way as well. So just as a FYI. And our responses to disclosures are really, really important in being able to, determine or impact on a woman's subsequent help-seeking behaviours. So when we respond in one way, whether it's positive or negative, she'll take that to the next time she wants to talk to someone about it, and it will kind of shape whether or not she feels safe or comfortable or confident to get the support that she needs at that time. So that's why it's really important to know about what would be okay to say, some of the, general guidelines about how we would respond to disclosures, because we would like to make as much impact as possible, even if that person doesn't take away something for that day or want to engage in help in that day, they might do the next time or the next time or the next time. We know that women tend to leave, I think the stats are 7 times before they leave a relationship fully. So we're very, very prepared for the fact that we will be seeing someone over and over again, and the more information we can get to someone, the better, is my philosophy on it. So assessing the client, in terms of recognising the signs that there might be something going on in the relationship, of any sort of relationship, I'm not just meaning intimate partner violence, although a lot of our stats and research are around intimate partner violence, because we've been dealing with that since the 70s, and that's something that has kind of been more spoken about and researched than other forms at this point in time, but that is increasing. Whilst in our SCOT form that we're going to be using, we won't need to necessarily refer to these sort of indicators. It's a good idea to know about what they might be, in case you find yourself, you've done the SCOT form, and the next time you've seen that person, they haven't disclosed that stuff, and these sorts of signs might start coming out over your subsequent contacts with that person. So signs of physical injuries, they're rarely the thing that people will present with. They usually present with other stuff around the kind of emotional impacts, but I guess injuries, bruises, minor minor cuts and grazes, and patterns of repeated injuries as well. So the other symptoms that people often present with, and I guess this is where you guys might come into play, is that people might present with stress-related illnesses, anxiety, panic attacks, chronic headaches, vague aches and pains, that kind of, when they say abdominal pain, it's that kind of generalised feeling and sensation, but it's hard to pinpoint what it might be about. Joint muscle pain is something that people experience, and it's largely, I guess, due to living like this perhaps. If you're living in fear and you're constantly living like this, then your muscles and joints might very well be impacted on through that experience. Sleeping and eating disorders, and psychiatric illness in various forms. Some of the other indicators that we generally kind of pick up on through our ongoing contact with people is when you're talking to someone, they're kind of appearing to be nervous in having a conversation with you, like if they're about to disclose too much information, they're not sure about disclosing too much information, even though it's got nothing to do with the relationship. They might present to appointments with another person all the time. I know in hospitals oftentimes women present and their male partner will present with them during pregnancy and doesn't want to leave the room. They do have policies around removing that person so we can have a chat and do some exploration. That happens now, which is fantastic. But it's when you're observing those sort of situations, and it might be a person with their carer or something like that, that the person who may be experiencing violence, and it may not be, these are all indicators, are not meaning that these people absolutely are experiencing violence. But if that person's anxious in front of that person or getting them to relay the information all the time, relying on them and not feeling comfortable about saying what it is for themselves, it might be a sign that something is going on in that relationship that might be controlling. But as I said, that's not always the case. Like, I might go to a specialist with my mum and I'll get her to do the talking because I'm in shock. What am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. You're a specialist. What are you talking about? So, it's relative to the context about what's going on, and, use your common sense around that sort of stuff. It's around that feeling of fear or unhelpfulness or control around those experiences, because they're not, some of these are normal interactions, one might say. So it's about how you actually experience them in the context of all the other relationship you have with that person. Also, some of the kind of signs or indicators that we may come across is just something to be aware of, but doesn't necessarily mean the case. Recent separation or divorce. Not everyone who separates is because of family violence. That's not the case at all, but it is a risk factor associated with people and their safety, essentially, as well. With the last point about appears to be socially isolated with few social supports, some people do experience the person who's using violence or perpetrating violence to be withholding their availability to access support, so they're not allowed to see family or friends, but they also may feel guilty for doing that. It's not like there's a rule that says you can't do that, but they might feel guilty for having relationships with other people, or may also feel like someone will be able to know somehow or pick up on there's something not right about this certain relationship, so they withdraw themselves from their social situation. So it's just something to be aware of. But then again, people experience social isolation for many reasons. So this is just a list of indicators in children, and I don't know if many of you have any contact with children, but this is just something to be aware of in relation to children's behaviours and presentations. Did you need me to go through that at all? I don't think many people will have children. No? Awesome. So given that they're our general indicators, what we're looking at doing with the Scott form, and I'm not going to go into the whole Scott form in detail because that's for another space, but as you'll see, and it's in your package, the tool has a question which is kind of directly aimed at eliciting, or being able to support someone around family violence. The beauty of having a tool like this is it kind of makes our practice of asking people about their experience more routine. So we're kind of putting it out there to people that we're going to ask these questions, we're okay to listen to the answers to those questions, and we'll get you the right support should you choose to, disclose to us what's going on for you. and want that support as well. So it's a really helpful way for staff to be able to practice this sort of thing, because I guess the language is also taken out of our hands about how do we broach the subject. It's kind of out there for us. So that's, I guess, the beauty of doing it this way. So the way that the form is set out is that you have your various statements, and it is consumer administered, so the client will have it and the client will fill it out by themselves and bring it to your appointment, and we'll go through that process another time. So the client has the option of ticking the two boxes. The first box is to, I guess, state that yes, this statement actually affects me and implies a situation that I'm involved with. And the second tick box is stating whether or not that person actually wants to discuss it in your appointment with you. And that's for the time that you bring it into the appointment, not necessarily that you be revisiting the form every time you meet with that person, but you're aware of what gets disclosed and not disclosed for you to follow up in your general practices anyway.
Just wondering,
yeah.
Simple like this form with a tick, 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 tick. But actually, sometimes people, they don't want to disclose.
Yeah.
Because they are afraid of like something happening if they report.
Yeah.
Like disclose professional.
Yeah.
So they are worrying about to disclose their relationship.
Yeah.
Because they want to keep the relationship in a way.
Yeah. So do you mean that people won't necessarily disclose because it might mean that their service will be withheld in different ways, or that you might report to authorities?
They are afraid of like a professional, like a report to police.
Sure.
Something like this.
Yeah. And that's the risk we have all the time anyway. So whether they tick these boxes or not, they have a choice about whether they want to tick these or not. When we do our common assessment, we'll be asking questions, or anytime we're doing assessments with anyone, we'll be asking questions and assessing, and we might very well need to report to the police or the CAT team or child protection in any of our practices. We do that all the time. And it's about being clear about that. Like, we do that when we do our rights and responsibilities, so that should be out there that from time to time, should you tell me something that, is concerning, I'll need to notify authorities about it. And clients do choose what they'll tell you after you have that conversation as well. The idea is that, if you feel like people answering these questions might need to be put at more ease around what's going to happen to that information, do what you normally do with your common assessment and practices. I'm sure you have those conversations about, like, this is for us to be able to work out how we can best support you through our service and through other services, because we take these issues seriously and we want people to have healthy and well lives. So that's the whole goal behind it. Is that okay? Yeah. So with the question, the whole process of the question, so the client, hypothetically, the client brings in the form and the client hasn't answered any of the form and hasn't answered that question. And you might say to them, just wondering how you're going with the questionnaire. Do you understand what some of these questions mean? It might very well be that person actually doesn't understand what the question means, because it could mean anything to anyone. I could read it in one way and someone could read it in another way. My understanding of what the statement of "I have felt afraid of someone who controls or hurts me" might mean something quite different to someone else. My meaning might be quite broad, given that I work with family violence all the time. And to someone else, it might mean physical abuse, because a lot of people think of it as physical abuse. So in that sort of situation where a client doesn't quite understand the question or wants it to be clarified, we can use other ways to ask the same question. And it might be quite broad, like, how are things going at home? How are you and your partner relating? How are you and your children relating if it's an older person? There's a lot, I know that I've heard anecdotally from staff that there's a fair bit of elder abuse that people are now seeing through our client group. And if that also doesn't elicit very much and you're not quite sure if that's understood, asking direct questions is a really good way to find out asking them directly to find out what's going on. If they want to disclose it all, that's up to them. They can say no. So questions like, are you concerned for your safety or your children's safety? Are there ever times where you feel frightened by your partner, your child, your mother, your father, whatever it might be? The reason why we say ask direct questions is because we know anecdotally from women who most of the support ends up going to because it is a gendered service system. We know from them that if you ask a person directly, they will give you more likely give you an answer than if you go around in circles. So if you say to a woman directly, I'm actually worried about what's going on. Is something going on at home? Are you frightened of your partner? I'm witnessing these sorts of things. They kind of know that you're okay for them to answer your question about it because you've put it out there to say, this is not okay, I'm concerned about this, let's talk about it. So women respond more so to people actually asking the question than not. And I think there's a video about that stuff, and I don't have it today because we don't have time to play it, but that's certainly one of the things that do come up. If you had just asked me, I would have said yes. Why did you? I gave you all these signs and indicators, but no one ever asked me. If you had asked me, I would have said yes. So it's really important to remember that. Don't be frightened. So at the appointment, and you've got the form in front of you, the client has not ticked at all the statement because they've ticked everything else and they actually haven't ticked that bit about that question around hurt and safety in that relationship. If the answer is no, in a sense, it might very well mean that there is no family violence. It might very well mean that they don't want to answer that question, they don't feel comfortable answering that question, or it might mean that there is something going on and they don't want to disclose it. There's no point in us pushing people to answer a question in the affirmative. We need to believe that person, and in that time, in that space, this is what they want to tell us now, and we're going to work with that. If you've asked that question and someone has said no, thank them for answering the question. It's actually a hard one for people to be confronted with sometimes. So, say, thank you for answering that question. If you ever find yourself in that situation or know of someone that's in that situation and you're wanting assistance around it, please come talk to us. We're available to do that. So regardless of the fact of whether she or he is experiencing it at that time or not, they are aware that, you're okay to have that conversation at another time should they need to. If the client ticks yes to this statement applying to them, but does not tick that they want to discuss it, that's okay as well. But I would suggest acknowledging the fact that you see that written down on the form. For me, best practice wouldn't be to go, okay, they don't want to discuss it, I'm just going to leave that. It's the same goes for all of the other boxes on that sheet. If someone says it's an issue and doesn't tick that they want it to be discussed, acknowledge that. I see that you've ticked these things, and if you don't want to talk about them now, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to talk to me about it any other time, please feel free to. I know about some of this stuff. I can support you to get the right support should you need to access support in the future or talk about safety or anything like that. Okay? Does that feel all right? And then, yay, the client ticks the statement and the client says, yeah, I want to talk about it. What do we do then? I see that you've ticked this statement. This is what the statement says. Repeat it back to them so they know they can hear you say the words rather than you go, I see that you ticked this one here. Say the words back to them because it means that you're okay to say the words and then perhaps hear the words. So if you say to them, this is what I see you've ticked, can you tell me more about what's going on for you? What's happening at home? What's happening in your relationships? And explore that with them. The trick to exploring it with them, I know that people don't have time in a first assessment to be doing all this work. You have other things that are going on. They might be coming in for a pod appointment. They might be coming in for a physio appointment, a dietitian appointment. You've got a lot of other stuff to be covering, but it is really, really important to allow that person to have the space to talk about it. Even if it is that you can do it for a short amount of time, you can say, look, I really want to talk about this. Can we talk about it? If we run out of time talking about, because I know we've got, treatment to be doing, etc., we can make another time to be able to talk about that, or quickly catch up and get you in the right sort of place to get the right support around it. Yeah? So the keys around when someone is disclosed is listening non-judgmentally. And communicating belief. So, you know, it takes a lot of courage for someone to disclose. So acknowledge that, you know, that's a real challenge for people, because they don't tend to disclose because they don't feel like they're going to be believed if they disclose. So either people will think that, this is what I hear a lot, people will think that I'm making it up. People will think that this would never happen to me because I'm this type of person, or people won't think as big as a problem as what I feel it to be. So it's really important to communicate belief. That's a thing that is something that we learnt 101 in DV practice when going into the field. You know, show them that you believe them. It goes a really, really long way for them to then continue to disclose to people and seek help. How many times I've heard someone go, oh, when I went to the doctor and like I just felt really judged and I don't think he really believed what I was saying. And you just think, wow, that's a real shame because it's now been 5 years since you did that, and you know, a whole bunch of time has passed. Even if they choose not to do anything at the time with you, you know, around shifting situations, communicating that means that they might be likely to talk about it more openly again in future. And also something that's really important is to emphasise the unacceptability of the violence. So often when people disclose things, and I find this I work with people directly around family violence, so you'd think that people would think, oh, I can tell you these things. But how many times people go, oh, but I should have done that and I could have done that, and if only I didn't do these things, he wouldn't have done that. What I always say to them is that, you know, that's all great, we have control about our own behaviours, but you're not the one who's, you know, physically picked up that thing and hit you with it, or you're not the one who called yourself those names, and, you know, it's not your fault. Like, there's nothing that you've done that would mean that you would deserve that sort of behaviour. No one deserves that behaviour. It's your human right to not live with that. So I would be communicating that with someone. And I guess the key thing to be kind of putting across in all of that is to say that whatever you decide to do, whether you want to seek help at this time or not, whether, you know, you want to report this to someone or not, whether you want to stay in the relationship or not, we're here to support you. Whatever it is that you decide to do, we're open to supporting you and what that might look like for you. So some of the helpful responses we've kind of gone through in the previous section. Unhelpful responses. And this is also, I believe, on your little cheat sheet that I've put together, which has the do's and don'ts of responses. So unhelpful responses, opposite to what we said the helpful ones are: not believing the person, minimising or downplaying the situation. Workers not understanding. So this doesn't mean that you need to know absolutely everything about someone's life or relationship or, you know, family violence through and through. It's about workers not understanding is about not believing, essentially. If you don't communicate a belief and an understanding of how someone would have got from that experience of violence as an objective, at an objective level, to that impact that it's having, that you're sitting there shaking in front of me, if you don't can communicate an understanding of how that would happen, that's kind of not necessarily, I guess, damaging to the relationship of disclosure and further down the track. Not meeting a person's immediate concerns. This is actually a quote that came from, these are quotes that came from women. This was a research that was done within one of the women's services, and this is the feedback they got from women. That one of the women said, I wanted to talk to my GP, but they said, wait until next week. I think you should leave him and I'll get you and the children to refuge. Like, telling someone else what to do is never going to work. I tell my dog to do lots of things and she doesn't do what I ask her to do, so I don't think it's going to work for anyone. Using logical argument, like, it's a fact that violence only gets worse over time. She probably knows that, or he probably knows that. That's you know, we know that. That's not the reason why we continue to stay in a relationship or decide to leave. It's about a whole bunch of other factors. So saying that to someone's not necessarily going to actually change the situation. And judging, you know it's harmful to children, exposing them to this sort of thing, you shouldn't let it happen. That sort of statement often leaves women holding a whole lot of responsibility, and I say women because it's often this way, but it leaves women holding a whole bunch of responsibility for what's happening in that home when we know full well that the perpetrator is responsible for their own behaviour, and let's shift the responsibility away from that, from the woman in this situation, to kind of go, well, dad actually has a responsibility to make sure that children are safe. So let's put it to there, not to that woman, because they experience it and carry that for a really long time, and that's often what we see in counselling. Questions about that? No? So assessing the risk and safety planning. So we've had a chat to the person, we've got the disclosure, we want to discuss it, and we've had a conversation about what's happening. They've told you, there's a bunch of physical abuse that's happening, emotional, financial, intimidating behaviours and stuff. So we've identified that there's family violence happening. We're going to get a sense of what kind of aspects might be going on for that person. And so we move towards assessing the risk. Risk assessment is something that, is embedded into specialist services practices. So we go through quite a thorough risk assessment. Bless you. We go through quite a thorough risk assessment with people. It's not expected that everybody does risk assessment to the same level that we do risk assessment. So don't feel like I'm saying to you, now you've got this information, you need to do a really thorough risk assessment, which might take you half an hour. That's not the point. It's about getting all the screening done and then trying to support as much as possible where you can. If you want to do, know more about doing thorough risk assessments, there's training available. It's called CRAF, and I'll put up a slide in a minute. So what your role then would be is to undertake basic safety measures and utilise, your own knowledge about family violence services, and make the referrals where you need to make them. Which is, what common assessment is as well. We're looking at screening that and seeing who needs what support, and we're going to refer them to the appropriate place for that if that's what they want, if that's what the client wants at any time. If they don't, that's fine. That's their decision. That's absolutely their decision. And it's hard to sit with because you know what's going on, but that happens a lot. If you think about the amount of the 60,000 police reports per year, and that's gone up. I know that's gone up, but we would, I used to work in a service that received those reports. So you'd ring the woman, you'd try ring her 3 or 4 times, and she says, look, I don't want support. I know full well that, what the incident involved. I know full well that there were children involved. She doesn't want support, and I can't make her have that support. So, all you can do is impart information to her. This is what I know about family violence. I'm concerned because there are risks. From what you've just told me, there are risks. What would be useful for you to be able to gauge, where risk is for you, and what would change that situation? If you think that you're feeling like you can manage it now and you don't need extra support, how will you know when your situation's changed and you do want the support? Have you thought about those things? So I'd be encouraging that. You don't need to sit down with them and talk about it at length, but you can offer that. And you can say, look, if you don't want to talk to me about it, there are lines that you can call. That person can call WIRE, that person can call 1-800-RESPECT, and they can have those conversations about where is their line on that. And it can be anonymous, so you can kind of remove it that way. But you can give them those numbers and those options. And they might then decide, in 6 months. I remember that time that Tracy said this stuff, and maybe I could contact them now. That's enough for me. Yeah. So when we're looking at assessing risk and safety planning, there are 3 elements that we use in determining levels of risk. I'm telling you this so that you know what we go through when we're doing a risk assessment. So what we do is we'll look at the victim's own assessment of their level of risk, and that's because people have an intimate understanding of their perpetrator. And I know that the language is really blunt, but that's pretty much the case. And when I say intimate knowledge of their perpetrator, I mean their patterns of behaviour, what might increase their risk at various times. So some people's experience tends to get more and more risky if that person has been drinking more and more. Doesn't mean that it causes violence. It means that it can contribute to higher kind of, more injury and things like that as a result. But also things like, just say he or she has gone through a certain period of lull, and then I know after 6 weeks all the kind of stuff tends to build up from him, and I know that this is now a period where I'm probably going to be at risk. So they kind of know those sorts of things, and they tend to know when things are escalating and not. There's also evidence-based indicators, and the evidence-based indicators are from research about, fatality and serious harm. And the next slide, this slide here shows you what they are. So the ones with the asterisks on them, they're the ones that are indicators for higher risk outcomes, so risk of fatality and risk of serious harm. And if you look through them, they might be pretty self-explanatory. Like if someone has access to a weapon, it's pretty concerning. If someone has threatened to kill someone before, it's pretty concerning. And those asterisk ones come from research that show that when they've done research around women that have been killed as a result of family violence, they found these factors essentially as part of those. And the third one that we look at is the practitioner's professional judgment. So this means your ability to understand and assess risk. Your understanding about where things might be at for that person. Sometimes people don't necessarily find the connections that we might find from our own practice and history of practice. So if you ever want to know anything more about that, this is the risk assessment training that we go through. It's called Common Risk Assessment Framework. Everyone across the state uses this as a way to measure risk, and it does take into account a victim's experience at the time, because it might be that, that person, we know that perpetrator has tried to choke them or threatened to kill them, but they haven't seen them for 3 years and they're not stalking them. So whilst we know that they're really high risk factors, they might not be high for right this very second. So this fluctuates. It doesn't stay the same all the time. It will change over time, increase, decrease, stay the same. So after we've discussed the current situation, because they've disclosed, and we've identified some of the risk factors present, we then start to look at safety and safety planning. So when we talk about safety planning, we keep in the back of our mind what those risk factors were and what those risk factors continue to be. So basically a safety plan, and I think there should be this on your cheat sheet as well, a safety plan is a step-by-step plan for the victim and their children, if they've got them, their pets, because pets are important to people, and oftentimes they feel like they can't leave because they've got pets, and there are places that we can get support through. I think Brianna may have sent some stuff around in the not that far away past.
There's services that can look after them.
Yeah, there's Pets in Peril, I think, as well in the east, and a range of places, but do have a look because that's really useful. The safety plan follows on from those risk factors, includes information about how to leave an unsafe situation safely, and it needs to be relevant to the individual and regularly updated because situations change, just like those risk factors change. And it's done in collaboration with the person. So we're not going to tell someone, we know a good safety plan is to do this, this and that. It may not mean anything to them. For example, some people choose to change their phone number if they're being harassed. Some people don't. And the reasons why they do or don't actually play a part in their safety planning. So I worked with a woman once who had been separated for 5 years. She refused to change her phone number because she knew that when she got that one call every 6 months, he was on his way. And that was her way of gauging her own safety. If she didn't have that, then she would never know that he was going to be coming and she was at risk. So, everything's relevant. The reasons why people do things are really relevant to how they've kept themselves safe up until this point. So when we're doing our safety plan, the first thing we want to do is ask people about their immediate safety. So what are your concerns regarding your safety at this time? So they've come into the assessment with their form. They've said, I experienced this, I just want to discuss it. I've discussed it with you, these are my risks. You're going to ask them, are you safe to go home? You've told me all this stuff. I'm concerned about that. Is it okay to go home? Do they know that you're here? What's our plan around this? If it's not safe to go home, do you have a safe place to go to? Can you go and stay with friends or relatives? Is that appropriate? Friends or relatives may not know and they may not feel like intruding on them, but it's an option to explore. Have you ever called the police? These sorts of questions help us elicit how they've been able to respond in the past to unsafe situations, because we need to come from an assumption that the person who's experienced violence and abuse within their intimate relationship has been doing things to protect themselves and make themselves safe up until this point that they've told you, because they have, and they may have experienced it for 10 years and they're still here and they're still accessing services, but they're still experiencing it. So there's something that they're doing that's been able to help them stay safe. So in terms of that immediate stuff, we're going to find out what's going on right now. Is it safe? Is it not safe? If that person says, look, no, it's safe to go home today, I'm actually fine, like it's an ongoing thing, it's not like it's escalating to points where I feel like I'm really, really at risk, but it's an ongoing thing, talk about future safety options. Did you know that there's intervention orders? Did you know that people aren't allowed to actually do this in relationships? Because what you're telling me, no, there's no physical abuse, but what you're telling me is controlling your money, you're being put down every other day, you're walking on eggshells at home, and you feel like you can't actually breathe in that space. You know that some of these things are actually classified as abusive behaviours. They might be under an intervention order. You can have an intervention order and still live together, they're just not allowed to use those behaviours. Did you know that? Like, have a chat about those sorts of things to plan for future safety. And formulate a safety plan. And this is where that question, like to write, and you can write these down with people, write down, this is what I would do in this situation. And we've got templates for safety plans upstairs if anyone wants to or needs to ever use one. But what have you done before to keep you and your children safe? I call the police when it hits this point. I've actually called the refuge before just to have a chat, but I've never actually gone there. I know that 2 days before what's going to happen, because I can see this warning sign, he starts to say these certain things, so I actually go and stay with my mum at that time. That's all part of someone's safety plan. Because if we can't support people to access services, we can at least do safety planning with them. So as a basic requirement would be that you give contact numbers for family violence organisations, emergency contact numbers. If someone says, yeah, I call the police, encourage them to call 000. Don't call your local police station, because you will, one, not get through, and two, it's not recorded. So if something happens, 000 is the way to go. And I think recently we had someone call a station and they made them call 000 and then go back. So just 000, they're the rules. My rules. Identify a safe place to go if someone's in danger. Identify a friend or family member or neighbour. So some people, whilst they may not feel comfortable to call the police themselves, they might go to their neighbour and say, just so you know, if you ever hear these sorts of things happening, I give you permission to call 000 for me on my behalf, because I actually need help if that's what's going on. So that it's not necessarily that person that's kind of put in a situation where they might be also blamed for having called the police, because that's one of the reasons why people don't call the police, because they feel guilty or they feel fearful. So if they call the police, if you ever call the police, you watch what happens. So that sort of fear makes them not seek help. Identify ways to contact emergency support. So if you don't have a telephone, or your telephone gets taken off you all the time, how else would you do it? And that's via either a neighbour, or if you are able to get out, do you know where your local coin, do even people carry coins anymore? The pay phones, they're 000, you don't need one. You don't need any cash. But also access to cash and access to documents. So if people do passports and stuff like that, if they need to leave, they need to leave. So that's your basic requirements for safety planning, and then these are the ideas around further safety planning. So if it's really, if there's a lot of stuff going on, and in your conversation with someone you will find out little bits and pieces about how that person's experiencing the family violence, and if some of these measures are largely in relation to separations, where just say it's an intimate partner and they've separated the relationship, but that the victim continues to experience behaviours from their ex-partner or perpetrator of sorts. These are some of the examples that you can use and find what's relevant for that person. And it might not be anything on the list and something completely obscure that we would never have thought about. So, referral and information sharing. So my advice around knowing how to do making those referrals is to know who your family violence service providers are. I've given you guys a list of support services. For women experiencing violence from partners, other family members, and partners can be female partners, they can be same-sex relationships, that our local service provider is the Salvos, which is down the road. And for men who are experiencing family violence as a victim, there's very few things available for people in terms of, say, case management support. It largely happens through the Victims Assistance program, and I think they're based out at Windermere. And that's largely around counselling. I think they do have some funding generally for case management as well, but not so much. And as I said before, the system, the domestic violence support system is quite gendered, so our response is victim women and perpetrator male, and that's why we have men's behaviour change. We don't have programs for females who are perpetrators at this point in time. Yeah.
When do you refer to your team?
So the family violence team that's based at Inner South is a men's behaviour change program primarily. So we receive funding to provide men's services. There are 3 women's counsellors within that program and a children's counsellor, but our referrals mainly come via the men's service. So we must be available to the partners coming through the men's service. When there's times where we have capacity, we can talk about those sorts of things, and people do approach us directly. I know I've received referrals from people before, but our capacity changes all the time. Connections is the service which is on the list, is the service that provides counselling for women in this inner region, and then SACASA has the funding for the outer region. And they're based in East Bentley. For people from cold backgrounds or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds, I would be encouraging you offer a culturally specific service if that's what they would prefer, and if not, then a mainstream. There are options like In Touch, which is on there, used to be the Immigrant Women's Domestic Violence Service, and they have language and cultural based case managers, and they do a fantastic job. And Elizabeth Hoffman's always who I've been contacting around Aboriginal clients, but it depends on where people are from, whether they want to engage with a cultural specific or a mainstream service because of community and stuff like that. So I always offer it, but at the end of the day, it's their decision where they would like to go for a referral. So you have your referral pathway, which I've given to you, and they're the different types of agencies. Thank you for your time.